You've just landed on an island somewhere in the Pacific. The air is thick enough to drink. The mud pulls at your boots with every step, and the enemy is just beyond the next ridge. You haven't known a dry night in weeks. Then, a new sound cuts through the jungle cacophony. The clatter of steel, the shouts of engineers. Before your eyes, a strange half-cylinder of corrugated metal rises from the mud. It's not a fortress. It's not a home. But tonight, it will be your hospital, your mess hall, your refuge. And it was built in a single day. This is the story of a weapon that fired no shots, a piece of technology that dropped no bombs, but one that arguably did as much to win the Second World War as any tank or battleship. It is the story of a simple, unassuming structure and the industrial philosophy that made it possible. It is the story of the Quonset hut. To understand its revolutionary impact, we must first look to the enemy and to a mindset forged in the forests of Europe. The German Wehrmacht, in the early years of the war, moved with terrifying speed, but their logistical tale was built on a philosophy of permanence. When they conquered a territory, they planned to stay. Their barracks, like their tanks and their guns, were marvels of engineering. The standard German Type B barracks was a testament to traditional craftsmanship. It was built from solid timber, with a proper foundation, insulated walls, and a peaked roof designed to shed the heavy snows of Europe. It was, in essence, a small, well-built house. It required teams of skilled carpenters and laborers, and it took them nearly 6 weeks to construct. The cost was equally substantial, $15,000 per unit in 1940s currency. This was a structure designed to endure for decades, a physical manifestation of the 1,000-year Reich. It was sturdy, comfortable, and utterly unsuited for a global, fast-moving war of conquest. Every nail hammered home, every beam carefully placed, represented time and resources that were becoming increasingly scarce. The German High Command saw barracks as an investment in occupied territory. They failed to see it as a bottleneck for future operations. While Germany invested in quality, America was confronting a completely different problem: quantity and the tyranny of distance. The United States was not fighting a war in its backyard. It was fighting across the vast Pacific and the stormy Atlantic. It needed to project power onto hostile shores, to build entire cities from scratch on barren coral atolls and in the hedgerows of France. They needed airfields, hospitals, command centers, and housing for millions of men, and they needed them yesterday. There was no time for 6-week construction projects, no shipping capacity for heavy lumber, and no guarantee of skilled labor at the front lines. The American problem demanded a different solution, one rooted not in craftsmanship, but in mass production. The inspiration for this solution came from a ghost of the previous war. During the First World War, a British royal engineer named Major Peter Nissen had designed a prefabricated shelter to deal with the mud and misery of the Western Front. The Nissen hut was a semicircular structure of corrugated iron, cheap and relatively easy to erect. It had served its purpose, but the design was flawed. It was drafty, dark, and inefficient to ship. Yet the core idea, a building in a box, lodged itself in the minds of military planners. In March of 1941, with war clouds gathering, the U.S. Navy knew they needed an answer. At their newly established naval air station, at Quonset Point, Rhode Island, they gave a team of engineers a daunting challenge: design a new hut. Make it lightweight enough to be shipped by the thousand. Make it simple enough that a team of unskilled GIs could assemble it with basic hand tools in a single day. and make it adaptable enough to function in the frozen hell of the Aleutian Islands and the sweltering jungles of Guadalcanal. On the drawing boards at Quonset Point, a new kind of war was about to be won, not with grand strategy, but with nuts, bolts, and sheet metal. The team at Quonset Point, led by engineer Otto Brandenberger, deconstructed the problem with ruthless efficiency. They abandoned the heavy materials and complex joinery of traditional building. Their solution was a marvel of modular design, a building reduced to its most essential elements. The skeleton was a series of lightweight, semicircular steel ribs. The skin was a layer of corrugated steel sheets, flexible enough to be shipped flat but strong once bolted into its curved shape. The front and back walls were simple plywood panels with pre-cut doors and windows. To solve the problem of climate, a layer of masonite insulation was sandwiched inside, making the hut habitable in virtually any environment on Earth. The entire package was a self-contained kit. Every bolt, every screw, every panel was accounted for, packed into a single, compact crate that weighed just over 6,000 pounds. The genius was not just in the structure itself, but in the logistics of its delivery and construction. In July of 1941, the first prototype was put to the test. A team of inexperienced sailors, armed with nothing more than basic hand tools, descended on a pile of components. There were no blueprints to puzzle over, no complex measurements to make. The process was intuitive, almost like assembling a giant model kit. First, the foundation. Then, the steel ribs were bolted together and raised into position. The corrugated sheets were laid over the top and fastened down, followed by the end caps. In just 16 hours, a fully functional, weatherproof building stood where there had been only an empty field. The Navy had its answer. This speed was a strategic weapon. While a German construction battalion in occupied France spent a month and a half building a single barracks for a platoon, an American Seabee battalion in the Pacific could erect an entire company-sized cantonment in less than a week. The contrast in philosophies was laid bare. Germany's approach treated a building as a permanent fixture, an anchor. America's treated it as a tool, a disposable and rapidly deployable asset, like a rifle or a ration pack. The economic implications were just as staggering. For the $15,000 price tag of one German barracks, the United States could manufacture and ship 14 Quonset huts. In terms of manpower, that single German structure could house perhaps 40 men. The equivalent American investment could house over 500. Then came the morning of December the 7th, 1941. The attack on Pearl Harbor plunged the United States into a two-ocean war overnight. The demand for overseas bases exploded. Suddenly, the Quonset hut was no longer an interesting naval experiment. It was a critical component of the American war machine. The orders flooded in, not for hundreds, but for tens of thousands. American industry, the sleeping giant, awoke with a vengeance. Factories that had been making civilian goods were rapidly converted. The principles of the automotive assembly line were applied to architecture. At peak production, American factories were churning out an astonishing 170 complete huts every single day. A river of steel flowed from the heartland, destined for the beaches of Normandy, the volcanic sands of Iwo Jima, and the frozen tundra of the Aleutians. The war of logistics had begun in earnest, and America was armed with the secret weapon its enemies had fatally underestimated. The true power of the Quonset hut was not as a piece of architecture, but as an instrument of conquest. It was instant infrastructure. Wherever American forces made a beachhead, the huts followed, arriving as flat-packed potential in the holds of transport ships. On the disease-ridden shores of Guadalcanal, where torrential rain turned the ground into a bottomless quagmire, traditional construction was a fantasy. Wood rotted, tents dissolved into mildew, and soldiers were worn down as much by the climate as by the enemy. Here the Quonset hut was a lifeline. Erected on simple foundations, its steel skin was impervious to the rot and insects. It became a dry place to store ammunition, a sterile environment for surgeons to save lives, and a morale-boosting shelter that offered a brief respite from the unrelenting misery of the jungle. The GIs and Marines who fought for every inch of that island could look back from the front lines and see the physical evidence of their progress. A growing city of silver arches, a tangible sign that they were there to stay. Thousands of miles to the north, in the brutal, windswept Aleutian Islands, the hut faced its opposite test. Here, the enemy was not heat and humidity, but relentless sub-zero cold and hurricane-force winds known as willywaws. Soldiers fighting the Japanese in this forgotten theater of the war faced conditions that could freeze a man solid in minutes. A standard military tent was a death sentence. Yet the insulated Quonset hut, with a simple stove installed, became a bastion of warmth and survival. Its curved shape, a marvel of aerodynamic efficiency, deflected the worst of the winds that would have flattened a conventional wooden structure. For the men huddled inside, it was more than shelter. It was a psychological shield against an environment determined to kill them. This adaptability was a strategic advantage. The German High Command, with their rigid, climate-specific designs, could never hope to match. Their barracks, designed for a European winter, would have been useless in the Pacific, while their desert structures offered little protection on the Eastern Front. The Quonset hut was a universal soldier. As the Allies prepared for the greatest undertaking of the war, Operation Overlord, the fields of southern England disappeared under a tide of steel. Entire divisions of men, along with their vehicles, supplies, and command structures, needed to be housed. In months, vast cities of Quonset huts sprang up, creating sprawling logistical hubs that became the engine room of the D-Day invasion. These were not just barracks. They were chapels, movie theaters, briefing rooms, and aircraft hangars. The sheer speed of their assembly allowed planners to keep pace with the massive, last-minute influx of troops and material. This logistical miracle was made possible by the hut's shipping efficiency. Because the components could be packed so tightly, they took up a fraction of the cargo space required for raw lumber or pre-built sections. It is estimated that in the Pacific Theater alone, the use of Quonset huts instead of traditional construction saved over 3 million tons of precious shipping capacity, space that could now be used for tanks, beans, and bullets. Every hut that landed was a victory in the invisible war of logistics, freeing up resources and accelerating the Allied timetable toward victory. On June 6, 1944, the Allies stormed the beaches of Normandy. The initial assault was a brutal, bloody affair, but the battle for France would be won or lost in the weeks that followed. It would be a race of reinforcement and supply. Hitler's fortress Europe was formidable, with a well-developed network of roads, railways, and permanent garrisons. The Allies, on the other hand, had to build their entire logistical base from scratch on a hostile shore, all while under enemy fire. Within days of the landings, the first crates of Quonset huts were being offloaded onto the temporary Mulberry harbors. While German defenders fell back to their sturdy, timber-framed barracks deep inside France, American engineers were performing miracles in the sand. On what had been empty stretches of coastline, entire airfields materialized in a matter of weeks. The runways were laid with steel matting, and the control towers, maintenance sheds, and pilot briefing rooms were all Quonset huts. Fighter bombers that had previously flown from bases in England could now operate just miles from the front lines, dramatically increasing their sortie rates and providing critical, on-demand air support for the ground troops slugging it out in the bocage. This ability to rapidly push air power forward was a direct result of the Quonset's design. It was a force multiplier. Every hut that went up was a node in a growing network of Allied power, a network that expanded faster than the Wehrmacht could counter. The same principle applied to medical care. In past wars, the wounded faced a perilous journey back from the front, often dying from infection or shock in transit. In Normandy, vast field hospitals, composed entirely of interconnected Quonset huts, were established just behind the lines. They were clean, well-lit, and could be assembled far faster than any traditional structure. For a wounded soldier pulled from a burning Sherman tank or a bloody firefight in a French village, the sight of that arched steel roof meant a chance at survival that his father in the trenches of 1918 could only have dreamed of. It was here that the economic contrast became a matter of life and death. The cost of a single permanent German barracks, $15,000, was enough to buy 3 brand-new Sherman tanks. It represented a fundamental misunderstanding of wartime economics. The Wehrmacht was spending the price of a small armored platoon on housing that was strategically immobile. The Allies, meanwhile, were spending the equivalent on 14 rapidly deployable structures that could become a hospital, an airfield command post, or a supply depot, directly contributing to the tempo and lethality of their operations. This efficiency cascaded through the entire war effort. The Germans were bogged down by their own philosophy of quality over quantity, a mindset more suited to a peacetime construction company than a global military conflict. They required skilled labor, which was increasingly being conscripted into the infantry. They required vast quantities of wood, a resource becoming scarcer as Allied bombing hammered German supply lines. The Americans, by contrast, needed only a handful of GIs with wrenches and a flat piece of ground. The hut was the physical embodiment of the industrial might that Germany had so disastrously underestimated. It was a product of a nation that understood that in modern warfare, victory belongs to the side that can put the most assets in the right place in the shortest amount of time. As the war machine rolled east into Germany and west across the Pacific, the Quonset hut became a ubiquitous symbol of the Allied advance. The sheer scale of its deployment was breathtaking. On the volcanic ash of Iwo Jima, where every square foot of ground was contested, Seabees assembled huts under artillery fire to serve as aid stations and command posts. The island, little more than a pile of rock and sand, was transformed into a massive, unsinkable aircraft carrier for the B-29 bombers striking the Japanese mainland. This transformation, from a barren rock to a critical strategic airbase in a matter of weeks, would have been impossible without a building that could be erected almost anywhere, by anyone. The battle for Okinawa was another brutal testament to the hut's utility. The fighting was savage, and the terrain was unforgiving. As American forces clawed their way across the island, they built their logistical chain as they went. Supply depots made of Quonset huts sprang up in captured valleys, protecting vital ammunition and rations from the island's frequent typhoons. The huts weren't just shelter. They were the building blocks of a mobile war economy. They allowed the American military to sustain high-intensity combat operations thousands of miles from its nearest permanent base. This operational tempo was something the Axis powers could not match. In North Africa, Rommel's Africa Corps was a formidable fighting force, but it was constantly hamstrung by a precarious supply line stretching across the Mediterranean. German and Italian engineers struggled to build the infrastructure needed to support armored warfare in the desert, relying on slow, conventional methods. On the other side of the line, as the Allies pushed from Egypt and landed in Morocco and Algeria, they brought their infrastructure with them in crates. Airfields and supply dumps appeared in the desert seemingly overnight, allowing the Allied air forces to dominate the skies and choke off Rommel's lifeline. The same story played out on the punishing Eastern Front. The German army, advancing into the Soviet Union, outran its own logistics. The scorched earth tactics of the retreating Red Army left nothing behind. German engineers, trained to build durable, permanent structures, were faced with a wasteland. Their construction methods were too slow, their material requirements too great. As the infamous Russian winter closed in, the Wehrmacht froze in its summer uniforms, its logistical tail in tatters. While the Quonset hut itself was not a major feature of the Soviet war effort, its underlying philosophy, speed, simplicity, and mass production, was precisely what the German system lacked. The contrast between the two industrial cultures was a decisive, if often overlooked, factor in the war's outcome. One culture valued the perfect, over-engineered solution. The other valued the good-enough solution, delivered in overwhelming numbers right now. One built for 1,000 years, the other built to win the war by next Tuesday. And in a global conflict, speed and volume would always defeat slow perfection. By 1945, over 170,000 Quonset huts had been produced and shipped to every corner of the globe. They were the anonymous backdrop to a world at war, the humble stage upon which history was made. From the planning rooms of generals to the operating tables of surgeons, from the mess halls where soldiers shared their last hot meal to the chapels where they prayed for deliverance, the simple arch of corrugated steel was there, a silent and essential partner in the Allied victory. When the guns finally fell silent in 1945, the world was left with a surplus of everything that had been built to win the war: tanks, planes, ships, and a staggering number of Quonset huts. The German barracks, those sturdy monuments to a fallen empire, shared the fate of the regime that built them. Many were destroyed in the fighting, shattered by artillery or consumed by fire. Those that survived on occupied soil were often dismantled or simply abandoned, symbols of a brutal occupation that no one wished to preserve. They were too permanent, too tied to a specific location and a dark history to have much of a future. But the Quonset hut was different. It was never meant to be permanent. It was a temporary solution, a tool designed for a specific job. And now that the job was done, it was ready for a new one. The American government, faced with the challenge of demobilization and a massive housing shortage at home, saw an opportunity. They declared the huts surplus and began selling them off to the public. Of the 170,000 built, nearly 160,000 were sold and began a remarkable second life. Soldiers returning home, eager to start families and build new lives, found a country where traditional housing was scarce and expensive. For a few $100s, they could buy a Quonset hut and a piece of the American dream. All across the country, these humble military buildings were repurposed with incredible ingenuity. They became starter homes for young veterans, their curved interiors a blank canvas for a new generation. On farms, they were transformed into barns, equipment sheds, and livestock shelters, their durable steel construction ideal for agricultural life. Universities, suddenly flooded with students on the GI Bill, bought them by the dozen, creating entire campuses of Quonset hut classrooms, dormitories, and libraries. They became small businesses, auto repair shops, diners, and movie theaters. Even churches found a home under their arched roofs, their congregations gathering in a space once designed for war. This post-war legacy was a testament to the hut's inherent flexibility. Its simple, open-plan design could be adapted to almost any purpose. It had no historical baggage. It was a pure utilitarian object, ready to be whatever its new owner needed it to be. In a way, the Quonset hut became a symbol of the post-war American ethos, pragmatic, innovative, and focused on building a prosperous future out of the materials of the past. It quietly seeded the American landscape with the principles of prefabrication and modular construction. Long before IKEA made flat-pack furniture a global phenomenon, the Quonset hut had delivered a flat-pack building to the masses. It introduced an entire generation to the idea that a home didn't have to be built stick by skilled craftsmen. It could arrive in a box and be assembled quickly and affordably. While the more elegant and complex architectural movements of the era would get more attention in the history books, the humble Quonset hut had a more profound and widespread impact on the built environment of the common person. It was a victory not just in war, but in peace, proving that a design born of necessity could find a second calling in the pursuit of prosperity. The story of the Quonset hut versus the German barracks is more than a comparison of construction techniques. It is the story of two conflicting worldviews, two industrial philosophies locked in a global struggle. One was a philosophy of perfectionism and permanence, a belief that even a simple barracks should be a monument of craftsmanship. It was a system that produced magnificent tiger tanks that were mechanical nightmares and barracks that were better built than many civilian homes. But it was a system that could not scale, could not adapt, and could not move at the speed of modern war. The other philosophy was one of pragmatism and disposability. It was rooted in the assembly line, the mail-order catalog, and a deep-seated belief in good enough. It created Sherman tanks by the tens of thousands and simple, effective buildings that could be put up and torn down as the battlefield shifted. It was a system that understood that the ultimate measure of a weapon, be it a rifle, a building, or a battleship, is not its perfection, but its availability at the decisive moment. In the final analysis, logistics is the forgotten victor of the Second World War. Great generals and brave soldiers win battles, but it is logistics that wins wars. The German war machine, for all its tactical brilliance, was continually hobbled by a logistical chain that was too slow, too heavy, and too complex. The Allied war machine, by contrast, was built on the principle of speed and volume. The Quonset hut was the purest expression of that principle. It was never celebrated for its beauty or comfort. To the soldiers who lived in them, they were noisy in the rain and oven-like in the tropical sun. But they were always there. They were the dry bed after a week in a flooded foxhole. They were the hot meal served in a makeshift mess hall. They were the surgeon's clean table just miles from the fighting. They were the tangible, steel-ribbed promise that wherever the American soldier went, a small piece of the arsenal of democracy would be there to support him. The fate of these two structures after the war tells the final story. The German barracks, immobile and tied to a defeated ideology, largely vanished from the earth. The Quonset hut, flexible and unbound by a single purpose, seamlessly integrated itself into the fabric of civilian life. It became a part of the peace it had helped to win. It stands as a humble monument not to a single battle, but to the overwhelming power of an idea, that in the crucible of total war, victory belongs not to the side that builds the strongest, but to the side that builds the fastest. The craftsman's hammer could build a shelter for 40 men in 6 weeks. The American factory could build shelters for nearly 1,200 men in a single day. In that simple, brutal arithmetic lies the secret of a world-changing victory.